For the first time, I saw my face on the screen without its usual shine. My skin was turning gray from the merciless studio light, and a white ribbon with other people's hands on my accounts and other people's voices in my head ran alongside it. The video began without prelude. Someone sat in the dark, mechanically clicking a mouse and opening contracts with my signatures one by one, certificates with stamps underneath, and above it all a cold, collected, even gentle voice. His empire is built on deals that shouldn't have existed. I recognized the voice immediately. My younger brother. The one whose university I had paid for, his first business, all his disasters while he was learning to fall on other people's shoulders. I stood in my own living room, between a silent clock and a large black grand piano, and with each click of the mouse that echoed from the screen, I felt a crack creeping across the floor, a thin blade that cut my neatly laid out biography into two sides, before and after. "This is a montage," Elena whispered, holding my elbow as if I were about to fall. "You didn't sign this." I laughed, but the sound came out hollow and soft, like an empty glass placed on marble. "I signed," I said and felt her hand freeze. I remembered all the signatures, direct, nervous, sober, drunk. They were mine, because empires are not built on moral principles, they are built on deadlines, fear, and the silence of others. It was a different time, I added, and hated myself for this cheap phrase. On the screen, my brother showed me correspondence where I agreed to an accelerated withdrawal of assets to clear the risks before a big deal. It seemed to me that an invisible comment crept into every pause between his words. "You created this yourself." "Why him?" Elena spoke as if she was afraid the walls would repeat her question. "Why did he go against you?" I looked at the dark window, where the same video was reflected, two screens of my fall, one real, the other mirrored, and both inexorable. "Because I taught him to count," I replied. "And those who know how to count will sooner or later sum you up too." The phone vibrated, lawyers, the press, unknown numbers, messages from people who learned to pronounce my name correctly only at my desk. I didn't pick up any of them. In the video, my brother took off his hood, looked up at the camera, and said, "I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing this so that someone will finally stop him." I turned off the sound, but the words continued to ring in me like a bell in a metal case. The doorbell rang, short, impatient, with a pulse. I approached, and even before I pressed the handle, I realized, from now on, I will not convince anyone until I convince myself. I opened it. And I saw someone I did not expect even in the darkest scenario. My mother. With eyes in which I read the verdict from which no signature can hide. Mother didn't say a word. She just looked at me, for a long time, silently, with the same calmness that was always more terrifying than any scream. I wanted to explain that it wasn't true, that everything was twisted, that the truth was more complicated. But every attempt at justification would have sounded like a rotten chain breaking under its own weight. She sat down on the sofa, took off her gloves, laid them beside her, and asked only one thing. "Is it true?" I couldn't answer. Silence stretched between us like a chasm. Mother nodded, as if she had heard everything I hadn't said. Then she stood up, adjusted her coat, and said quietly, without trembling. "You've always been good at counting, son. But you seem to have forgotten that life doesn't come down to zeros after the decimal point." The door closed. And with it, everything that was human in my house. After that evening, the decline began. Slow, methodical, painful, not all at once, but piecemeal. First, banks suspended credit lines. Then, partners paused all joint projects. People who had called me a visionary yesterday now avoided even my name in conversations. Every day, new exclusives appeared in the media. Someone leaked correspondence, someone threw up old videos from negotiations, someone found offshore companies that I had forgotten about. Lawyers advised me to wait, the PR team demanded to accept partial blame to look more human. But nothing else came to mind. How could my brother do this? How could someone who grew up next to me, who shared my childhood rooms, now cut me into pieces in front of the whole world? I didn't sleep at night. I wrote him dozens of messages. No answer. Only once, a short audio. You don't even understand who you destroyed. And who you made like yourself. I listened to these words hundreds of times. And in each repetition I heard not anger, but disappointment. I had destroyed not only the business. I had destroyed faith, in myself, in my family, in my own principles. When men in black suits appeared at the door of my office, I didn't even ask who they were. One held out documents, official charges of financial fraud. The cameras were already waiting at the entrance. The flashes flickered, as if I was the center of attention again, only now the spotlight burned my eyes, not raised my status. In the car, on the way to the station, I looked out the window, where the whole city seemed foreign, the same buildings, the same streets, but as if cut from another reality. In the window I saw my reflection, not a businessman, not a public figure, but a person who had finally realized that her entire empire was not built on glass, but on ice. And this ice had been cracking for a long time, I just didn't want to hear it. As they were leading me down the corridor, one of the journalists shouted. So it's true, that everything is a setup? That my brother did it for the money of his competitors? I stopped. I smiled. And I answered quietly. No. He did it for the truth. But inside, somewhere under this phrase, another voice was being born. Quiet, but sharp, like a knife. If this is his war, I will find out what it started for. And it was then that I realized, I hadn't just fallen. I had entered the darkness, where the light of the truth would be more painful than any lie. I was released on bail, not out of sympathy, but because it was more convenient for the system. Let the rich burn publicly, let their downfall be broadcast live. My house was empty, the staff disappeared, even the dog wouldn't leave the room. The phone was silent, except for one number, an old, long-forgotten contact, Dmitry Arkivari. We had once worked together on a project that was never launched, because of the risks, as lawyers said then. I remembered, it was he who had once shown me how to hide documents that the world shouldn't see. And now he was calling me. I knew you would fall, he said when I picked up the phone. But I didn't think it would be so deep. Did you also come to remind me what a scoundrel I am? No. I came to show you that you're not the only one. An hour later we met in an abandoned office in Podol, where they had once filmed the first commercial for my company. The rain beat on the glass, and it sounded as if someone was slowly counting down the last minutes of my name. Dmitry pulled a flash drive out of his old bag. Here are the records from the servers. Your brother did not act alone. He had access to the materials that you yourself once destroyed. Only they were not destroyed. They are saved in a copy marked Archive for safety. For your safety. I took the flash drive. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from memories. I remembered the day when I ordered this copy to be created. Just in case, I said then. And now this case had come. If you open this, Dmitry warned, there will be no turning back. There is a truth there that you cannot show to anyone. Not even to yourself. I stood up, went to the window. Under my feet, puddles, reflections of neon lights, shadows of people hurrying under umbrellas. And somewhere in there, among them, he must be my brother. A man who knew me better than I knew myself. Open it, I said. Old letters appeared on the screen. Contracts. Videos. My company had indeed committed what was now called a crime. But among the files was another one, the one that changed everything. A recording of an internal meeting 10 years ago. In it, I spoke not as I was now, cold and self-confident, but honestly, even naively. If we go down this path, we will destroy everything we started for. Money will not save us if we lose trust. And then, the voice of my partner, the man who now headed the largest competing holding. Either you sign, or you will not be in business tomorrow. Choose, hero. I signed. And from that moment on, it all began. I sat, not taking my eyes off the screen. Dmitri looked at me silently. "So, he just showed you your past," he said finally. "And you thought it was betrayal?" "No," I answered. "It's not the past. It's a sentence." That night I realized that my brother hadn't taken revenge. He made me remember who I was before I became who I became. He did what no one dared to do. And in this cruel truth a new desire was born. Not to justify myself, but to persevere. To return not money but a name. But not for the world, but for myself. I turned off the computer. "Dmitri," I said, "I need your help." "You know," he smiled, "everything that is forbidden always begins with this sentence." We worked nights. Without cameras, without witnesses, without sleep. Dmitro brought old servers, I restored documents that I had once ordered destroyed. It was like digging in my own grave, but I had to see every bone before I could rise from the dead. I saw how the system I had created grew, engulfing everything around me, politicians, banks, journalists. Everyone was involved, but only I was made a symbol of corruption, because a symbol is easier to burn than an entire machine. I began to see the bigger picture. And for the first time in many years, I was not afraid to look at the truth. Those who had applauded me yesterday were today whitewashing their own names by referring to me. Those who spoke of honesty and transparency were taking bribes from competitors to destroy my company from the inside. And my brother, he only opened the door behind which the wolves stood. One night Dmitro put a piece of paper on the table. "If you sign this," he said, "you will destroy them. But with them, you will destroy yourself." It was a plan for exposure. A complete list of schemes, deals, frauds. A list of names, those who were considered untouchable. I could bring down everything, government structures, corporations, banks, with one click. But mine was among those names. "If I do this," I said quietly, "I will never be able to rise again." "And if you don't, you will live in a lie," he replied. "Choose what is more important to you, the future or the imprints of the past." I stared at the sheet for a long time. In my imagination, I saw my house, which already belonged to the bank. Elena, she had left for another country, leaving only a short message, "I'm sorry, but I can't breathe these lies anymore." I saw my mother, she had stopped answering the phone. And my brother, who was still silent. Then I realized, if I don't reveal the truth, I will remain a shadow of my own crime. And if I do, maybe I will become human for the first time. I clicked send. The file went online, to dozens of media outlets, to all the archives. Dmitri closed his laptop and smiled bitterly. "You just signed your own sentence." "No," I said. "I simply paid back the debt to the world." The next morning the news exploded. Everyone was talking about only one thing, the scale of corruption, the schemes that reached the very top of power. And in the middle of it all was my name. Now no longer as a criminal, but as a whistleblower. But I knew that the system does not forgive even the one who saved it. In the evening, black cars drove up to my house. I was waiting for them. Without fear. Without panic. When the door was kicked in, I was standing in the middle of the room, no tie, no security, no status. Just me in silence. One of the men in the bulletproof vest came up and said, "Did you know you wouldn't survive this?" I looked him straight in the eye. "Did you know that none of us had lived to this point?" And then, for the first time in years, I felt peace. Not pride, not fear, just pure, transparent silence. Like before dawn, when you realize that the night wasn't so dark for nothing. I was not imprisoned. Not because I was innocent, but because the system could not bear its own weight. After the revelation, what analysts called a domino effect began. Banks collapsed, ministers lost their positions, old corporations burned in the fire of investigations. I was summoned to court, but the hearing was cancelled, the documents I revealed had turned into weapons of mutual destruction, and the authorities suddenly decided that it was more convenient not to touch me. I left the capital at night. Without a guard, without a driver. I drove alone, along the old road to the sea. The rain beat on the windshield, the headlights slid on the wet asphalt, as if time was erasing my tracks. Sometime after 3 o'clock I stopped at an abandoned motel, turned off the engine and for the first time in a long time heard silence, real, not the silence that remains after the explosions, but the silence in which new life is born. A message flashed on my phone, from my brother. I saw what you did. And for the first time, I don't hate you. I reread it a dozen times. Then I typed the answer. You were right. I lived as if everything could be bought. But there are things that cost exactly as much as they hurt. There was no answer. But I didn't need one. Because I knew his silence was not out of contempt now, it was out of understanding. The next morning I went out to sea. The cold air was beating in my lungs, but it was real. I looked at the waves, and each one reminded me of the years I had spent chasing a shine that was worthless without a shadow. The world called me a criminal, then a hero, then forgot me again. But for the first time, I didn't need any of those titles. I no longer had company, wealth, friends. All that remained were trembling hands and a memory that no flash drive could erase. But in this loss I finally felt the weight of the real. Wealth is not money, not power, not names in the newspapers. Wealth is when you can sleep knowing that you have hidden nothing from yourself. I looked at the horizon and thought, maybe one day they will accuse me again, rewrite my story, make me a monster or a saint, it makes no difference. Because all that will remain for real is that I finally managed to say the most honest words of my life. I am no longer afraid of the truth. The wind rose, the sky was torn apart by the first ray of the sun, and the light touched the water. Then I realized, even if everything is lost, it is not the end. This is simply the moment when you see yourself without mirrors for the first time.